So I have an unfortunate update for everybody. This is about Trump's emoluments case. The Supreme Court on Monday ordered lower courts to dismiss two cases that allege former President Donald Trump unlawfully profited from his businesses while in office, in violation of the Constitution's emoluments clauses. Both sides agreed the issue had become moot after Trump's term finished on January 20th, according to Bloomberg, ending a prolonged legal battle that extended for most of his presidency. A federal appeals court last February dismissed a case based on the emoluments clause from 215 congressional Democrats, citing a lack of standing. The Supreme Court's move on Monday leaves open questions about emoluments for future presidents who retain business interests while in office, like Trump did. Worth noting, the dismissed cases, Trump versus Crew and Trump versus District of Columbia, could potentially have carved a path to access Trump's financial records if they had gone through during his presidency. Okay, so this is a bit of a tragedy, and let me explain why. Donald Trump was an egregious violator of the emoluments clause of the Constitution. Now, I know that sounds all fancy schmancy, but just understand, when they talk about emoluments, all that means is the president can't be corrupt. The president can't take money from foreign governments. That's all that means. That's it. That's all it means. I know it's a weird word, but that's how they refer to it in the Constitution. So he did take money from foreign governments, and he did take money from wealthy foreign investors with potential ties to governments. So probably the biggest offenders, Saudi Arabia, of course, and Israel, of course. There's been detailed reporting on Jared Kushner taking millions of dollars from Israeli banks. And of course, the Trump administration would turn around and give Israel everything they wanted. In the case of Saudi Arabia, we have specifics on it. We know that the Saudi Arabian government was paying Trump through his D.C. hotel and funneling him hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And, Trump turned around and gave them a multi-billion-dollar weapons deal as they were in the midst of doing a genocide in Yemen. Stop and think about that scandal. Stop and think about that scandal. Taking money from Saudi Arabia through your hotel in D.C., getting wealthy in the process, getting a lot of money in the process, then you turn around and give them money and weapons. The weapons they're literally using to carry out a genocide in Yemen. That might be the biggest scandal of the Trump administration, and it was barely covered. And nobody really connected the dots either. Like, when they talked about it, they only talked about it in the context of Trump is taking money through his D.C. hotel from Saudi Arabia as a business deal. They said, they sent U.S. soldiers there for like a getaway. This was the way that they were buying off Trump. But nobody connected the dots and said, but hold on now. Trump gave him a multi-billion-dollar weapons deal. Previous presidents had given Saudi Arabia weapons deals, and it's inexcusable then too, but Trump gave an even bigger weapons deal as they were carrying out a genocide in Yemen. Nobody connected those dots. Nobody did. So, Israel, Saudi Arabia, I think there were examples of Turkey as well when it comes to corruption. So the list goes on and on. He's a sitting U.S. president getting a lot of money from foreign investors and foreign governments. That alone is unacceptable. The example from earlier in American history is that Jimmy Carter was forced to sell his peanut farm, not because he was actually corrupt, but because they said it leaves an opportunity for a foreign government to funnel him money through his peanut farm, and that could lead to corruption, so you got to sell your peanut farm. Trump did this nonsense thing where he pretended like, I'm turning over my businesses to my children. We're going to put it in a blind trust, and they're going to run it. I mean, still, that opens up a zillion legal and ethical questions. I mean, first of all, that's not even the way a blind trust works. A blind trust is something totally different, but giving it to your kids, that's not exactly like, it's not like you're no longer profiting off of what's happening with your businesses. Absurd. Again, this is a different scandal, but he was purposefully diverting like U.S. military planes and stuff and making people from the government stay at his own property so he could juice the numbers at his own businesses. All types of stuff, man. Just corruption all around. And what happened is the process took so freaking long in the courts that Trump was out of office before we got conclusions. And now everybody goes, okay, well, I guess that's it because he's not president anymore, so it's moot. It doesn't matter anymore. I would definitely argue that that's not correct. Of course it matters. Of course it matters. In fact, for something this egregious, honestly, if they if they looked at the details and found the sufficient evidence to build the case where you could actually prove some quid pro quos or whatever, and maybe you can do that through official government business with phone calls Trump made to foreign leaders like the Saudi leaders, then there should be freaking jail time for that, because this is really the stuff that's leading to the destruction of the United States of America. It's the corruption that's viewed as nonchalant, whether it's with foreign governments, but most importantly, when it's with Wall Street, when it's with Big Pharma, when it's with the military-industrial complex. Standard operating procedure is bribery, and it's corruption. And it's the politicians doing the bidding of corporations and billionaires, and in Trump's case, even foreign investors and foreign governments. So an example needs to be made of what he did. You can't let this stuff happen. Now, listen, I'm consistent on this stuff. I'm not a partisan hack, so when I look at the Clinton Foundation and how corrupt that was, I say, wow, that's corrupt. When you looked at the specifics, how they were making their money and what they were doing in return when Hillary was Secretary of State, it's inexcusable. Biden, listen, it's true, man. There was a very detailed article in Politico. This was, I think it was when Biden was VP, or maybe just after, maybe came out like 2016 or something like that, 2017. Biden and his family, they have a long history of profiting off of his name. So my point is, it's the whole culture of the DC elites and the establishment. And Trump just was part of that culture and put it on steroids and human growth hormone. And now the courts are running cover for them by saying, oh, what can we do? He's out of office now, so we're not even going to, rule on this case. You definitely should rule on it. And if it's indeed the case that you can prove what we know is the case, then he should get prison time. He should be locked up, because this corruption is really destroying the country. So this is actually a huge deal, man. And this is one of those things where, a lot was made, rightly so, of the attempted insurrection, the diet coup, which failed miserably. But this is one of those scandals where people don't view it as sexy because it requires a little bit of explaining. But really, this is just as egregious as that. That we had a U.S. president who's in there to more so represent Wall Street and the military-industrial complex and the Saudi Arabian government and the Israeli government and wealthy individuals. That's the problem. That's the issue in our government. And now we don't even get an answer, and the courts punted on it. And honestly, it's stupid, and it's disgusting, and it's grotesque. So in terms of justice in regards to Trump, now, honestly, what you're doing is you're just hoping that the Attorney General in New York can get him on business crimes, because they're investigating, and I'm sure they're finding a lot of stuff, because listen, he's been a corrupt businessman his whole life. You can't be a builder in New York City in the 1980s and not have mob connections. Okay, we've seen the detailed reporting on his taxes to this point, and we know that there was insurance fraud and tax fraud and writing stuff off, giving the money to Ivanka as he's writing it off on his taxes as if it's going to a consultant. There's all types of bullshit. Overvaluing assets when he wants to sell it, undervaluing it for taxes, all sorts of shit. So they might actually get him on some business crimes. But unfortunately, they're not going to get him on probably his worst crimes of all, which is the rank corruption while he was in office.